Subject this morning is how to live without tension and fear. I would like to suggest that you visualize hand-to-hand combat. Back in the old days when they had to use all their muscles, they couldn't just pull a trigger, fighting with swords and daggers and whatever they had. And somebody's there fighting, maybe 3 people at once, and somebody comes up to him and says, "Relax." It would be ridiculous, wouldn't it? Obviously, there's no way of relaxing unless he's going to throw in the sword and give up, probably get killed in the process. The only way he can really relax is to win the battle or finish it in one way or the other. But it's only after it's done that he will be able to say, all right, now it's over, I can relax. So there are 2 kinds of relaxation that we can think about. There is the real relaxation that comes with victory, not the relaxation, it isn't worthy of the name relaxation, that which says, let's not fight. That which says, let's not struggle, let's not compete to achieve what we have to achieve in life. Competition in a wholesome sense is possible. Competition that puts down the other person is not good, but competition against oneself, using whatever someone else does to try to do even better, this is wholesome. But to say, no, it's not worth it, I just want to relax, I don't want to struggle. Some people give this advice. It's not good advice. Because ultimately, even if we get out of, this was sort of the theme of the 60s, wasn't it? Drop out and whatever else was happening, I forget, tuning in, was it? And turn on, was that right? Something like that. Anyway, it didn't work. You saw all these people bombed out on the sidewalks, and they looked relaxed in the sense of disintegration. But we're talking of another kind of relaxation into true peace. You can't do that without battle. You can't do that. That's why the story of the Bhagavad Gita is set on a battlefield, the battle of life. We achieve final rest only in God. And we may as well recognize that until then, even non-action is action in that definition. As Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, nobody can escape action by not acting, because that too is a form of action. It's a decision of the ego to refrain from something rather than a merging of the ego into the infinite, which alone is true peace. You don't find true peace in sleep. You find it only in deep meditation. And an interesting point is how often people who think to achieve rest in sleep, for example, a very interesting example, years ago I was given the job of reorganizing the office at Mount Washington. I thought the job would take 2 weeks, but it took 1.5 years because I was only really trying to reorganize the letter department so that people would get answers to their letters in a short time instead of waiting 2 months. Now they wait 2 or 3 months. But anyway, that was my goal. And yet I realized that couldn't happen unless some related department was organized. That department couldn't be organized unless some other department was organized. I ended up doing the whole office. And all that time I had to keep in my mind the letter writing department and the department that was related to that and the department that was related to the other and so on. So I had all these things juggling in my mind, and I was very sort of tense with this effort. It was very difficult for me because I was not by nature an office person. I'd never wanted to be. And so I was going even against my own natural grain. Such that at the end of 1.5 years, when I finished the job, I was so tired that I went off and I went for a period of seclusion. But instead of going into meditation, I just thought, well, I'm too tired to meditate, so I slept the whole week that I was out there. I meditated 2 or 3 hours, which was more or less minimal for me, but I didn't do the more that one ought to do when he has nothing else to do. And so most of my time was spent sleeping and reading and sunbathing. And I came back from there feeling pretty rested, but after a week or two and more work, I was tired again. The next time I had a chance to go out for seclusion, I was also equally tired, I think, because I always had a tendency to work hard. And that time I figured I'd learned my lesson. And so for the first 2 days I sort of, in order to change gears mentally, I rested a lot and didn't meditate so much. But after 2 days, when I was somewhat rested, I started in on a program of real meditation, and I meditated 8 hours a day and maybe up to 12 hours a day, and really put my willpower out to go deep in meditation. And at the end of that week, I was so recharged, so full of energy, that for a year afterwards I was just bursting with energy. It did me an enormous amount of good, much, much more good than that week of just passive rest. This too is a demonstration of the truth of what I've been saying, a truth that's emphasized in many scriptures, that you do not attain peace by merely refraining from action, by merely escaping responsibility. You attain it by discharging your responsibility, and in fact, by winning. On the battlefield, winning or losing isn't really that big an issue, but winning in the true sense, success in life, doesn't mean necessarily doing a good job. It means doing a good job on yourself. For example, I've told you about a time years ago when I was invited to teach for the Peace Corps, and I accepted the job for 2 reasons. One was that it paid very well, and that's what enabled me to get Ananda started. And that's the beginning of it. It paid for the books that helped to bring the people to the classes, that helped to build the retreat, etc. But the other thing was that I very much wanted to see these boys who were going to India be a true link between the two countries, and I felt I had a lot to teach them in a way of really appreciating what India was, not to see it through Western eyes, but to see it in the context of their own culture. And I felt I had something to say. But they were really not even interested in India. They joined the Peace Corps, possibly for a lark, I don't know. Whatever the reason, to most of them the whole program meant a week of classes so that they could get out and get drunk on Saturday night. And they just weren't interested in what I had. And the more I tried, the more they got up in arms. They didn't want to learn about Indian philosophy, they wanted to learn about India, which to them meant 5-year plans and village rehabilitation and all those things. So finally, I was sort of discouraged because I had really put my heart in it. But finally, I had to admit to myself that I had failed, that there was absolutely nothing I could do, because my success depended upon their receptivity, and I had pulled out every stop I could think of, and it still hadn't worked. So I had to accept. It was very unpalatable for me to admit to myself that there was nothing I could do. I had failed in what I had tried to do, and I had been taking the government's money and not giving it proper return for it. And yet suddenly I found that in accepting failure and really saying, all right, so it's a fact, that I felt great victory, because I realized that it didn't really matter. I'd always felt non-attached to the fruits of my actions, but this helped to drive that thought a little more deeply into my subconsciousness, that I did my best and the rest is purely in God's hands. With that thought of freedom, I realized that success does not necessarily mean what we think of as success. I read a story by Joan Grant, and I don't have much faith in her as an author, but anyway, she says that she remembers all these past incarnations, and there's one incarnation in which she had a fight with a bull on Crete and was killed in the bullfight. And she realized later that she'd been born only to develop the courage needed to be able to face that bull. Whether she was killed or not didn't really matter. But that she managed to muster up the courage to face that bull in a life or death struggle, that was her victory. Well, that was a good point made. Success then has to be, we have to succeed, even if success doesn't mean what we usually as human beings think that it means. It means finally freedom, learning a lesson, no longer having to repeat that lesson because it's finally ours and we've taken one more step toward infinite freedom. Only that kind of victory gives true peace. We can relax about these things as long once we have learned them. But as long as there's any fear, as long as there's any fear of the test, fear of the karma, of being drawn into it, fear of failure, even fear of success, because that is an actual fear of some people. It seems strange, but the knowledge that once you've succeeded, then all the responsibilities that you'll have on your shoulder, many people are afraid of trying to succeed. And even while they struggle to succeed, they, in their minds, defeat that effort by the very fact that they don't really want it. They haven't the courage to face it. As long as all those thoughts are there is still that karma to be worked out. You haven't worked it out as long as you're still afraid of that delusion, afraid of that karma. No, we can only achieve true freedom in victory. We can only achieve perfect and final freedom when we have overcome all karma and merged back into God. This has an interesting sidelight too in modern psychology, which is aware of man's pull in two directions, but much of psychology, I don't say all of it, but many, particularly the Freudian approach, is to say that we are our basic animalistic self, and any effort that we put out to be too far removed from that self is going to result in tension because it's pulling us into something that we aren't. And the advice of many such people to their clients is to go out and live a, quote, normal life. That means to live a worldly, sensual, animalistic life. That this is the real you. And until you've got your feet really on the ground and face that, everything else will just be sort of covering it up. Well, in a sense, what they're saying is that you'll relax if you go backwards, and you can't relax if you go forwards, because the backwards is what you really are, and the forwards is what you're creating for yourself out of nothing. It doesn't exist. The other way to look at it is to turn this telescope the other way around and say that why am I going forward? Why do I visualize something higher? I'm trying to fulfill a memory of what I really am. I want to grow out of the mud of my delusions. I want to grow into the free sunlight of the Spirit, because that's what I really am. And in this we can say that all progress is merely a discovering. We can put it in scientific terms by saying that anything that man has ever achieved has to be a potential reality long before he achieved it. Because if it wasn't a potential of the universe, he could never have achieved it. We can't create something that isn't. And so all the heights to which man has reached are there already as a present reality from the beginning of time. And man in his progress, in his evolution upwards, is merely exploring and discovering new dimensions of potential existence that are reality as potentials and merely need to be made kinetic. This is the real explanation for evolution, which I don't need to get into now. But we notice that there is in all of us this twofold pull. We always have it. The pull to go up and the pull to avoid by going down. The pull toward greater consciousness and the pull back into relative unconsciousness. That's why people drink themselves into a stupor, trying to escape pain. But of course, when they wake up from that, they have a double pain. The original, which they tried to escape, plus the hangover. Plus whatever they may have done to their nervous systems if they did it for a long enough time, and their bodies. We can't really escape by escaping into unconsciousness because the reality is still there. The only real escape is by going upward. I heard somebody say something very intriguing once. Intriguing not because nobody's ever thought it, I imagine everybody's thought it. It takes a great deal of courage to love. Above all, to love God totally. It takes amazing courage. I said that to somebody once, a monk in SRF, and he said, I don't know what you're talking about. But to me it seems so self-evident that I didn't even know how to explain it if he didn't see what I meant. It does take courage to love totally. But this person voiced it in a way that many people have thought, but few people have the courage to say. He said, well, but if I love everybody, then they're going to love me, and if they love me, they're going to keep wanting to come and be with me and take up my time, and it'll mean I have to keep putting out more energy, and I don't want to do that, so I'm much better off not loving people. He was pretty frank, wasn't he? But in fact, that fear of success, that fear of greater awareness, and the responsibility that comes with it is something that all of us have. One person was saying to me also, I don't want to advance spiritually because if I do I'll develop powers, and if I have powers I might fall. And that's sort of weird reasoning, but nevertheless he was expressing this same anxiety which everyone has in one way or another. If we didn't have it, we'd all race toward God. But the thought of, oh, but once I've achieved that level of love, I'll be having to love all the time. What's with these movies I enjoy going to, and so on? I've got other things that are nice to do. That will consume me. There's that fear, not realizing that that's the only fulfillment that we can ever have. Okay, that is one kind of real relief from stress, from tension. The other kind is to be that kind of fighter who fights well. And for that too is required a level of relaxation. You'll notice that anybody who's good at whatever he does, whether it's fighting or athletics or talking physically now because it's something we can look at, you'll find that they are always relaxed as you can be when you're fighting for your life. But somebody who is not a good swordsman is not likely to win. Incidentally, there was an amusing and true story, at least I was told it was true, which seems like a contradiction. I'm not going to explore it. But anyway, this American was challenged to a duel by one of the foremost swordsmen in France, and won the duel. He didn't know how to fight. Because he didn't know the rules, he fought in such a totally unorthodox manner that the swordsman was just utterly bewildered. The American just kept going like this. But that's off the point. Somewhat more to the point, though, thinking of that same sort of thing, my father, when he was a young man in Romania, was challenged to a duel by somebody. And the classical way of thinking about things over there would have been that if you didn't accept such a challenge, you were looked upon as a coward. And my father is by no means a coward, but he simply felt that it's ridiculous to prove that I'm brave by going into something so stupid. So he refused. And he absolutely didn't care what people thought. He just saw no point in fighting and didn't fight. That's another kind of relaxation. Another way to be relaxed is not to care what other people think. To simply do what you've got to do, and do it as well as you can, and not be worried about all these bombarding thoughts that come from others that say you should be this, you should be that. So much time is spent in people's lives fending off what other people think. I remember in the same light, my father and all of us went to Capri, and we took a tour bus up to Villa Tiberius, where the Emperor Tiberius had his villa, and the view from there was stupendous, especially in those days before the smog. And After 5 minutes, the tour guide and the bus conductor said, "All right, let's go." And my father hadn't done enjoying the view. And he felt that we've come here to enjoy it, and I'm certainly not going to allow him to herd me around. So everybody was in the bus, and the bus driver was honking, and the tour guide was saying, "Come on, come on." And my father just quietly stood there and enjoyed it. And when he was through enjoying it, he got in the bus, and we all went on. And I admired him for that, even at my tender years of 7, because I knew I wouldn't have had the courage to do it. And besides which, it didn't mean anything to anyone else. What was the rush? We didn't have a plane to catch. If we'd come to enjoy it, why not do what we came for? And so, if you can learn to be self-directed, rather than directed by other people, directed by other people's expectations of you, if you can live by what you feel in your heart you must do, that is also one way of achieving this ability to live without stress and tension. What is that ability? Essentially, it is the ability to act from within. In that sense, you could say my father was a yogi. I think perhaps in only that sense, but I'm kidding in that. But he was non-attached. He was very truthful. He was centered in that way, but he wasn't on the spiritual path as we know it. And the issue there is that the teaching of yoga says that we should be centered in ourselves, and you'll find that if we can be completely centered here and not living from outside in, but from inside out, then we can live with that degree of relaxation which is needed in order to win the battle of life. There are some people who never do anything and they're always relaxed. I don't think that they are growing. I've noticed that horoscopes of people who show nothing but trines, everything is easy, everything is soft, such lives may be pleasant, but they don't advance you. It's far better to have many difficulties, many obstacles to overcome, many lessons to learn. In that way we grow. People who have horoscopes that show lots of stress and tension are really fortunate people. It's a great mistake to think that stress and tension are necessarily bad. It's what we do with them that can help us. We can achieve as much centeredness and poise and relaxation as is possible for the given circumstances, the given battles that we have to fight. But to say, no, we don't want the battles so that we can be relaxed, is a very common delusion. In astrology, they used to say that trines are fortunate and squares are unfortunate. More recently, astrologers have begun to see that, in fact, squares may be very good indeed if they give you the incentive, the challenge to grow spiritually. That kind of challenge doesn't come to a person who has such karma that he's born rich and has everything just handed to him. So, stress, tension, even as astrologers have discovered that squares may be very good, and that in themselves no aspects are necessarily bad if we have the right response to them. And as Master said, conditions are always neutral. They seem good or bad according to the attitude of the mind, the positive or negative attitude. But we can make the best of even the worst circumstances. Then we realize that the degree of tension that we're really talking about isn't that degree which doctors may say when they urge you to go take a vacation. That may be a good thing to have every now and then, but don't think that that's where your reality lies. Your reality lies in overcoming. If you can reach that other level, however, of being centered in yourself, then, and acting from within outward instead of from without inward, then you will be able to have that degree of poise, that degree of relaxation, that will enable you to turn left or right as the circumstances dictate. As new challenges come, you will find that a good swordsman will be able to take on maybe 3 at once because he's very much aware. There's that marvelous story that most of you have heard, some of you haven't, probably, of this famous samurai who was in a restaurant, and 3 other samurai came and tried to goad him to fight them, because they figured the 3 of them could take him on. And he paid no attention. He was not moved by their insults. But finally he decided he would show them. And so, with his chopsticks, there were some flies flying around his plate. With his chopsticks, he just went click, 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 3 times. And there were 3 dead flies on the table. And these men, realizing how completely centered and completely focused he was, that he had such coordination that with 3 clicks of those thin little sticks he was able to kill flies that were flying, they got up and slunk out. This is the kind of relaxation that we're really talking about. That relaxation of the cat is a very interesting one, and yogis often use a cat to illustrate the kind of relaxation that is needed. When you pick up a cat that's relaxing, it's just completely limp, absolutely relaxed. But if you just go like that, or threaten it in any way, instantly it's on its feet. You don't find the cat sort of looking up, what? And so we need to be completely relaxed, centered in ourselves, but ready at a moment's notice to go this way, that way, the other way. To the moment you're awake, be awake. That's why it's a good practice in the morning to get out of bed quickly and say, I'm awake and ready, walking in places we've taught. To learn to shift from one state of consciousness instantly to another is very helpful. That's why Master gave us this practice of, and it's a good one to do every day, to shift the level of gaze upward, straight ahead and down. Straight ahead is the conscious mind. When your eyes are looking straight ahead, that's the indicator of a mind that is aware of the world around it, aware through the senses, aware on a logical thinking level. The eyes looking down are withdrawn, but tend to go downward into subconsciousness. The eyes looking upward are withdrawn, but going into superconsciousness. By shifting your gaze into these 3 states and trying to induce these 3 states repeatedly, just looking straight ahead and going into the conscious. You could try that with me. It's a very good practice to do. Let's sit upright and look straight ahead and be completely conscious of this world. Be conscious through the senses. When somebody's really listening to what you're saying, he'll look right at you in that way. And then look down and close your eyes and feel that you're sinking into the dreamland, sinking into subconsciousness. And then with open eyes, look upward and feel that you're soaring up to at the point between the eyebrows into superconscious ecstasy. Now look down into subconsciousness. Sink down into the dreamland. Rise upward from that state into the conscious level. Be completely aware in this world. Look straight ahead with eyes open. And then look up and immediately shift your mind, your attention, your level of consciousness into the spiritual eye, into ecstasy, into soul consciousness. Once more, look down, close your eyes, sink into passivity, open your eyes and look straight ahead. Be intensely awake, intensely alert. And then raise your consciousness still further, soar into superconsciousness as you raise your vision upward. That's enough for that practice. It's a good one to do. It's a good thing to be able to shift your attention to whatever it is you have to do, whatever you're doing, whatever work you're doing, to be able to put your whole mind there so that you're incapable, in a sense, of doing anything else but that while you're doing it. And then as soon as you're through with that, stop it and do something else. Everything that you do with total concentration, total absorption. In that way, if you're centered within yourself and acting really from this center, then everything will flow in a natural way. You'll be as relaxed as you're likely to be. But if your mind is spread out over a large area, then you will be tense. You will be able, from this center, to go right or left or straight ahead, to do new things. You won't be constantly pulled by, oh dear, but I've got this to do, oh, those people are coming, oh, I've got to buy the groceries, oh this, oh that. And the mind gets so going in circles and yet is totally unproductive because it can't do anything well. If you can learn to be totally centered and then from that center to give yourself to whatever you've got to do, this is one of the great lessons to learn in the school of life, one of the great victories in the battle of life. Now, certain things will help. I was talking of concentration, of energy. But this also means relaxation from those things which would dilute that energy, which would distract it in different directions. Learning how to relax in that way means to be non-attached. Non-attached above all to the fruits of our actions. People think, this is the common criticism leveled even by scholars against the teaching in the Bhagavad Gita. What if I'm really non-attached to the fruits of my action, then presumably I won't act. Presumably I'll see no point in it. No, on the contrary, to be non-attached to the fruits of your actions, nishkam karma, desireless action, acting to do the best that you can, but letting the results take care of themselves, is really just a process of this centeredness that we're talking about. It's one of the surest keys to success, because it means putting all your energy right here where you are, instead of half of your energy being there in the future and saying, oh, I hope that I do it well. You'll find that people who worry too much about how they're doing aren't going to do nearly as well as those who are really able to concentrate. There was this one boy on our football team in high school who was a wolf, the class wolf. And do they still use that expression nowadays? I don't know. And it was so amusing because he was the end, so everybody could see him from that side of the field at least. And before every play, he'd take his helmet off and comb his hair and look up at the girls and put his helmet back on. Well, naturally that made him less a good player because he was so concentrated on what other people were thinking of him. A good player, a good at whatever he's doing person will be able to just concentrate on that. He won't be putting half his mind on what other people think, half his mind on whether I win or lose. There won't be that kind of anxiety. So, in fact, a person who is doing his best knows he can't do anything more and isn't going to waste energy thinking about that. You'll find that those people who have that attitude are able to rise no matter how many times they fail. Abraham Lincoln was a good example because he was defeated for public office every time he ran until finally he ran for the presidency. Isn't that strange? He had just a constant string of failures in his life, and yet he always got up and tried again, because he was just trying to do a good thing. It must have been that. If he had concentrated on success, I don't know whether he could have gone on in the face of so many disasters. The spider spins a web, and the wind comes and knocks it down. The spider spins a web again, and the wind comes, or an animal passes by and knocks it down, and the spider spins a web. Why? Because it's the nature of the spider to spin webs. It's the nature of man to act. And let him act without worrying about whatever else happens. Just do what you have to do, not for the sake of the web that you're spinning, but in order to put out the kind of energy that you need to put out in order to fulfill your karma and thus be freed of it. This attitude is a part of what will help you to be really relaxed. Another kind of distraction is self-definition. I was interested, as you know, last Thursday, a week ago, I had my birthday. And one of the children here said, "How old are you?" And I said, 57. And suddenly I felt, no, that's not true. And for the first time, I felt really, truly what Masters always said, I have no age. Because I remembered myself as a little child, and I was the same person. And you look at old people, and they're the same people. When I wrote my book, The Path, looking back over my childhood days and reliving them and looking at photographs of myself at the age of 3 and 4, looking into those eyes, it's the same old fellow. We come into this body, and it's a little baby's body, and then it's a little child's body, and then it's a young adult's body, and then it's an old middle-aged body, and then an old body, and it's the same person inside. The same basic consciousness, and age doesn't mean anything. I heard of a group of people who wanted to, here at Ananda, wanted to be more with people their own age, and I said, what do you mean their own age? We don't have any age here. Spiritual age is what really matters. If we understand that, we see that there are some people, and many of them are being born here, because they naturally want to come into a yogic community if they're yogis. There's some people, even as children, who are old, in the sense of having understanding, having learned important lessons. And there are some people who, even as old people, are just children, because they haven't yet learned very much. They're still on a much, much longer time scale than this body can possibly give us. In the few years that we live in this world, we can't learn very much unless we're really on the path. Very few people learn much in one lifetime. On the path you can learn it all, but you have to work for it. Don't be attached to your age. Don't be attached to where you are. You're the same person. You're always the same inside. Live more on that level. And that's what I also noticed when they said that. I realized, no, we don't have age here. Not those who really are on the path and understand. We can mix equally happily with children, with adults, with old people. We're equally comfortable even with the thought of leaving the body, because we know that life goes on. And so it is that when you can be freed from that kind of self-definition that takes you outside yourself, and just say, I am myself, I am here, I am not whether I succeeded or failed. People will make a lot of money and suddenly they become self-important. There's a delightful story in the life of Ramakrishna. The one man used to be a very beautiful devotee, very humble, came and visited him often. And then he didn't show up for a long time. One day they were coming in on a boat to the ghat, and as they were mounting the steps of the ghat, they saw this man sitting on a wall. And the man looked at Ramakrishna and said, "Oh, hello there, Ramakrishna." And Ramakrishna said to his friends, he must have inherited some money. It's a rare person who can have money and remain really humble. And yet that's a false definition. We don't really change. As long as we take those outward definitions and think, oh, I'm different because, and suddenly we become important, and suddenly we lose it and we become all crushed. Those people who committed suicide when the stock market crashed in 49 forgot that they came poor into this world. You don't build yourself anything, or what you do build for yourself, you leave it all behind. It can't remain yours. So if we learn to live centered within ourselves and not attached to body, to outward opinions of other people, to outward relationships, to outward temporary realities, which are not realities at all in the final sense, not attached to what we have, where we're going. Just every day, in fact, it would be good when you go to bed at night to give everything back to God. A very nice mental practice is to build a fire and just cast into that fire in your meditation at night everything. Just say, it's all yours, God. It's not mine. I don't want it. And the more we can live that way, the more we can find that kind of relaxation which this world makes possible for us. Fighting the battle of life and yet not succumbing to that battle. But please do keep this main thought in mind too. Don't think to find stress reduction by just avoiding troubles and difficulties, because they are your glory, they are your opportunity for growth. Be grateful for every challenge that life gives you. Don't go out seeking them, you'll get them. But when they come, don't regret it. Now there's another aspect to it, and that is that in the regret, and this happens to all of us, it's not merely the attachment to things, it's the non-attachment in a negative way to the thing you should do. The warrior there, for example, who regrets intensely that he has to be out there and thinks, if only I could be home having a beef stew, is not going to fight as well as the warrior who says, all right, as long as I'm here, I'll do the best I possibly can. But you find that most people are pulled in two directions. While they're doing something, they wish they weren't doing it. While they're doing something, there's always that sort of pull back, oh, but do I have to really try? This is something I observe here at Ananda too. That when people have a job to do, they don't do it as well as they could. They hope to get by with a lesser expenditure of energy. This is not an Ananda failing, it's a human failing that Ananda members haven't overcome. We should do the best we possibly can in anything that we've got to do. That means think of new ways to do it better. God will be able to use you if you use creative energy, if you don't just sit waiting for somebody to tell you what to do. I think that classical monastic discipline is terrible, anathema to spiritual progress. That one of the novice master telling the young novice to plant a plant in the ground upside down in order to test his obedience, that it's more important to be obedient and stupid than to be creative but independent. I don't think that we get rid of the ego any more than we get rid of action by non-acting. I don't think we get rid of the ego by not being creative, by not expressing the ego. It takes more energy to bottle up the ego than it does to offer what you're doing to God. That's why Master used to give us jobs that were real challenges of creativity. And my feeling also about his teaching is that we shouldn't do just literally everything that he says, but understand it creatively so that we can always do it and apply it in new circumstances. It's sort of like telling somebody that he shouldn't eat oranges because he shouldn't eat acid fruits. So somebody offers him a grapefruit and he eats the grapefruit because he was told not to eat oranges. Well, that's absurd, isn't it? Why were you told not to eat oranges? Then you can use that teaching in a broader context, isn't it so? And so, therefore, with your spiritual growth, don't shun your battles, but enjoy what you have to do. I speak from lots of personal experience because I have had great reluctance to get into things. I used to wish that I could be a hermit, and my life has been anything but eremitical. I used to not want to have to teach. I said to Master I didn't want to teach. His answer was, you'd better learn to like it. That's what you've got to do. I constantly was wishing that I didn't have to think about money and practical things. It's a pain for me to have to deal with those things, and yet I've had to do it. Well, the thing is that I did it anyway, even though I didn't want to. That was important. It would have been better still if I'd been able to say, oh, joy, let me do it. But at any rate, I did it, and I felt joy in myself in the process. But only when I really learned to accept that this was my dharma was I able to really put the energy out and gain from it. Until then, it was sort of a standoff between the two. I found that God's grace can flow. It's sort of like that wonderful little episode that I've described in the path of when Master told me to shake hands with people outside the church on Sundays. This long line of people, and as Master said, one way to draw magnetism from another person is to shake hands with him. And they were all coming to me as somebody appointed by Master to shake hands with them. And so with faith they shook hands with me. And in the process, without necessarily thinking, oh, I'm drawing magnetism, they did draw magnetism from me. And I literally felt dizzy and exhausted afterwards. I said, Master, please, I don't want to do this again. And he said that you're feeling this way because you're thinking of yourself. Think of God and let His energy flow through you, and you'll find that you don't get drained. And I did that, and I found that in fact I felt recharged by allowing God to use me as His instrument. If we could learn, finally, that this is what I've got to do, as long as I've got to do it, let me enjoy doing it, and let me in the process learn that the true enjoyment is doing it for God, learning to serve other people, learning above all to serve God. In the process, you'll find that there is a great gain and great joy and even relaxation in the process. There's also that lovely story in the path of Mira Mata, who worked very hard. And Master said, you've worked enough for incarnations, you mustn't work so hard. And so she tried to work less and cut down on her various duties. And the next thing she found when she saw Master the next time was that he gave her more work to do. And she thought, well, maybe he forgot. And anyway, she did it because he told her so. And in the process of doing it, he said, you mustn't work so hard. She thought, well, he tells me not to work, then he makes me work. What's he doing? So she tried to cut down on responsibilities again and do it more slowly. And just as she was starting to get a little more relaxed, he gave her more work. This went on 2 or 3 or 4 times, and finally when he gave her work to do, instead of getting all sort of uptight and in a seethe and so on, because she was a very in-tune disciple, she tried to meditate on what Master really meant. She knew that he must mean something. He wasn't just being absent-minded and telling her to work when he had told her not to work. So she attuned to him, and suddenly this thought came to her, and she said, Sir, when in our duties here in the colonies, why don't we substitute the word service for the word work? And Master smiled, and he said, it's been a good show, hasn't it? All your life you've been thinking work, 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 and that thought has exhausted you. But if you serve God and work to serve God, see what joy comes? That was a wonderful story and a wonderful lesson in it. That when we serve, when we give what we're doing to God, when we work for a higher cause, then we find that strength is always there. And God gives us the strength to do it. A very interesting case in point also was Bernard, one of the disciples there. When he arrived, he had double curvature of the spine. He only had one lung. There was no cushioning between many of the vertebrae, so that every time he walked it was painful. And in the morning he would wake up totally paralyzed. He couldn't get out of bed. He would have to sort of roll himself like this until finally he'd get up enough momentum to fall onto the floor and just sort of make his muscles slowly move, and then he could start his day's work again. Master put him driving the tractor, climbing scaffolding and plastering the sides of buildings. He put him in the kind of work that you'd think would be impossible for a man in his condition. And he did it joyfully, and he did it very well, and he had no trouble. He came out of all that pain and became a person of great energy and drive and so on. Then later on he became out of tune. His ego started to get strong. And he began to think, well, gosh, I shouldn't be doing this kind of work with a body like this. And I'm getting a little older. He was 35. That's not exactly doddering. But I should let the younger people do this hard work. And so Master, as long as he wanted that, gave him a nice room and had them build it up beautifully for him and put in file cabinets and everything that he wanted, Master gave him. But Master said, see, no matter how much I do for him, he keeps getting worse because he's not in tune. And when people are in tune, then somehow, even against impossible odds, everything somehow seems to go well. So it is that if we really work joyfully for God, He takes care of us. And if in the process we find that we spend our force for Him, who cares? It doesn't matter. If you can leave this body victorious in the thought of having served Him well, that is victory. So, with that, we must try to be as relaxed as we can, not in order to avoid stress and tension, but in order to be able to face it when we have to, rather than having no energy left at our disposal to be able to handle it when it comes. Don't regret those things, but rather, in fact, this has been an interesting psychological discovery in business and so on. They found that the people who are the happiest are those who have challenges to meet, those who do work hard, those who do follow a life that until recently everybody was saying shouldn't be followed because it creates too much tension. That a certain amount of tension, a certain amount of challenge is good for one. And without that, the tissues begin to sort of disintegrate, even physically. It's a very interesting point that the flowers that are grown in hothouses may grow much bigger than their cousins that are grown out of doors, and yet they're not nearly as hardy. You put those plants out of doors and they can't handle the wind, the sunlight, whereas a plant that's grown up from the beginning, from a little seedling, buffeted by winds and subject to the heat and cold of the elements and so on, this plant, although smaller, is very hardy. So those people who try to always be sort of cool, laid back and so on, they're really disintegrating personalities. The real kind of personality that grows is that which can joyously face the battle of life with the idea of winning victoriously over it. Now, one of the great things that prevents people from having that kind of centeredness and relaxation is fear. Fear of failure, fear of obstacles unforeseen, and so on. Fear of death. Fear of death is one of the major fears in life. How do we overcome fear? I think one way that's very helpful is to visualize the fear actually being fulfilled. Because it's almost never really what it seems like. Once you've really gone into something, anticipation is almost always greater than realization. I used to, in the beginning, when I was first teaching, I used to be a little nervous, especially that first Sunday that you all read about in the path when I had to take Master's place. I'd never spoken in public before, and here these people had been waiting for 2 months for him to come back to the church. Well, the church was absolutely packed that Sunday, and people were peering in through the windows and standing room only inside, and then the curtain opens and there's this 22-year-old boy. And yes, I was a little nervous. But I think, on the other hand, that was a very good way to launch me, because what is the fear of public speaking? The fear is that you'll be thought foolish. Well, in relation to what they expected, there was no need to fear that I would be thought foolish. I most obviously was foolish. And so I was able to say, well, okay, I mean, it's a fact. And so I could relax about it. And I found that that same technique worked all the way down the road later. That when I felt that fear, I would say, well, but supposing maybe I am a fool, so what? Doesn't change anything. I'm the guy who has to do this talk. And they have the bad luck to have to listen. But with that thought, I found that I could accept the reality. And I found that with fear, always, as Sri Yukteswar says in that story in the autobiography, when his mother said not to go into that closet, there was a ghost there, and Sri Yukteswar immediately went and opened the door and went in, and expressed great disappointment that there was no ghost. And so he said, look fear in the face and it will fly from you. And I found that that works, that anything that happens, if you really look at it, you can accept it. I practice that consciously because I find it's a very good technique for overcoming fear. Just to visualize the worst possible results of whatever you're doing and to say, then, and you find that you can take it, yes?
How can a devotee accept being out of tune?
Well, that's a perfectly good point. It's only once you accept where you are that you don't waste time worrying about it and say, what do I do about it? You see, once you accept a thing, then you can put all your energy into the constructive action necessary for success. And a very good answer to that question, how can the devotee accept being out of tune, was made by Saint Therese of Lisieux. She said she didn't really care whether she went to heaven. She said she even wanted to go to hell. She said, from the depths of hell, I would love to go there just to be able to prove that I can still love God. And if we have that attitude, that wherever we are, from there we have to start. Wherever we are, from there we can grow. God, that's the kind of devotion that God is pleased with. Because it takes everything in a positive way and says, now what do I do about it? And even flat on your back, in total devastation, if you say, all right, this is where I am, you're in the best position for doing something better. Maybe getting up and finally winning. Some people, many times in history, people have wrested victory from total disaster. This was a story. It was actually rather deliberate, but in the Battle of Hastings, they found that they couldn't break the solid phalanx of Harold's army. They'd formed in a solid square, and they just couldn't get through those shields. And so they had William had already planned this trick, but the soldiers pretended to flee. And as soon as the English saw them in flight, they thought, now we'll just drive them into the ocean. And they broke their ranks to pursue them. And at a given moment, suddenly, William's army turned around and faced them, and then they were able to beat them. So even taking it even as a literal thing, even in flight, even in disaster, if you, instead of saying, oh, no, no, turn around and say, now, it's so, but what do I do about it? History is full of examples of people who have wrested victory from the very jaws of disaster, and that was not possible as long as they were sitting there wasting energy, wishing it weren't so. A good example would be a tennis match. When somebody hits a difficult shot, if you stand there wringing your hands and saying, oh, how nasty of him, you're not going to be able to get that shot. You can't afford to waste time even telling yourself, I don't like that shot. You have to put all your energy into the simple thought, what do I do about it? And so there are times when every one of us gets out of tune. And instead of kicking ourselves down further by wishing it weren't so and saying how bad we are and crying and weeping and getting negative, instead of that, just accept, okay, I am. Now what do I do about it? Then we find that we put out the energy to meditate and get back in tune again. God's not going to push us away. If we do the right things, if we love Him, If we come with a cheerful attitude and say, but God, no matter how many mistakes, I love you, and I want you, and I want to serve you. Naughty or good, I'm your child. If we come with that attitude, He has to take us back. He loves us. He's on our side. But we hate ourselves when we say, oh, I'm no good, oh, I failed, and can't accept this as a present fact. We can't change that fact. We have to be able to accept what we are. This is something that I've often found in devotees, that they mistake affirmation for reality. That you will say, I said this to somebody a few weeks ago, I said, you're too attached. Oh, no, I'm not too attached. Oh, no, you don't understand. Well, so what can she do about being too attached if she doesn't admit that she is too attached, which in fact she is? But by that affirmation of something, she wasn't accepting. We must not affirm to the point where we can't see. To see and then affirm is good. To be able to look perfectly clearly and not wish that it be anything but what it is. I made a mistake. I said something unkind yesterday about somebody, and if I see that I said it and that it was unkind and that it shouldn't have been said, then I can say in my mind, all right, then what do I do about that tendency in myself to speak unkindly? And I can change it. But if I say, oh, no, that wasn't unkindness, oh, no, I wouldn't do that. It's a very normal thing for people who are trying to better themselves to try to make the affirmation stand for the actuality. And so we need to, yes, see where we are and then affirm that we aren't. But if we affirm first, we're in danger of slipping past that reality and sort of burying it. So then, seeing I was unkind and it was wrong, but it isn't my nature to be unkind and I refuse to give in to that again. I won't do it. Then that affirmation can release it. So, again, with lack of attunement, to say, oh, I'm really in tune, it's all right, this lousy feeling in my heart is, probably I ate something that didn't agree with me, but I'm fine. And then we keep on doing the very thing that brought that feeling into the heart before, which may have been unkindness, may not have been enough meditation, may have been various things that get us out of tune, not saying japa enough in our minds, not thinking enough about God. We keep going on in the same direction, saying, I'm fine, I'm just fine. And finally we fall off a cliff, spiritually. It's far better to say, okay, I'm wrong. What do I do about it now? That's the fine line that's so hard to catch between saying, I'm a sinner in a good way, and saying I'm a sinner in a way that Master said that's the greatest sin of all, is to call yourself a sinner. As I was saying last Saturday, wasn't it, or Sunday, if we can see where we are, offer that to God, and then try to reclaim our oneness with Him, then and then only do we come free. Do you understand? So, to overcome fear, another thought is to remember that you aren't the body. The terrible tortures that this body is sometimes subjected to in various incarnations of expiating bad karma, the terrible things that people do to one another, the horrible disasters that seem to loom, prophecies of continents going under. What will happen if the waves come here and suddenly you find yourself being engulfed in that and drowning? How many people have the good fortune, if that's what it is, to die peacefully in their beds? Maybe sometimes it isn't good fortune. If this is a karma you've got to pay off, maybe this is good, to have it come in some drastic way. And who knows where we will be 10 years from now, 20 years from now? What our fate is, we don't know. But if in our minds we can say, yes, but I'm not this body. And if the time comes to leave the body, let it go. If you can really, in your mind, when you go to bed at night, give everything in your body too, back to God and say, it's just an overcoat, I don't need it. If you can, in your mind, say that I have no age, I'm not this body, I'm not affected by the changes that take place in this body. If you can say, as Ananda Ma did, I'm ever the same. Whatever happens, I am ever the same. If you can have that consciousness, then you can certainly live without fear. Again, it says in the Bible, perfect love casteth out fear. If you can learn to love God deeply enough, you'll just know that He's with you. It isn't only a negative and a stoic kind of attitude that makes this state possible. That negative, stoic attitude, in fact, is possible as long as the tests don't come, or as long as they're not too severe. But when a severe test comes, philosophy goes out the window. You remember it when the storm starts to die down a little bit, if you've got it firmly implanted. But at the time of trial, I venture to say that you won't hang on to philosophy very easily. But if you have love, you'll be able to hang on to love. It must be a change of consciousness. It can't be only a change of ideas. The way we believe about things isn't enough. This is the inadequacy of the usual approach to psychology. The idea of psychology is that if we can help a person to recognize the influences in his life that gave him this trauma, that made him this way, or if we can help him to recognize the rationalizations in his mind that he's burying his motives and not seeing things clearly, if he can really see clearly, then he will change. But people can see things with their minds and not yet see them with their hearts. I've seen this again and again with people, that they will know perfectly well what they should do. They'll know perfectly well how they've rationalized. They'll even enjoy watching the game, and it's sort of an intellectual exercise, and yet somehow their hearts aren't touched, and they go on in the same way, making the same mistakes. That's why when Master was saying to Bernard one time, giving him some advice, and Bernard said, "I understand, sir." Master said, "You do not understand. If you understood, you'd do what I say." It isn't enough to think you understand. You've got to understand with your whole being. And that kind of understanding comes from a change in consciousness. If you can bring your consciousness into attunement, if you can bring it into a state of grace, of feeling the divine flow in meditation, then suddenly love, forgiveness, kindness, complete confidence and courage, all these things come naturally. Courage, in one sense, you can say that a man can't be called courageous unless there's a little fear. That's one level of courage. In other words, it doesn't take courage to step on an ant, unless you have the feeling that there's enormous bad karma to pay. It does take courage to stand in the face of a charging elephant. It may take folly too. Courage would be, let's say, that level of action which resists fear but not to the point of folly. It takes courage to do that which normally you'd be apprehensive about. But there's another level of courage which, recognizing the possibility for apprehension, recognizing the difficulties, just says, no, nothing matters, it's all God's. That kind of courage is a positive kind that substitutes for the fear such a total offering of the self to God, such total confidence in God, that in fact there isn't anything to be afraid of. That's the level of courage that you find in saints. They don't have fear. They don't have the consciousness of doing something courageous even. All they know is that they've totally placed themselves in God's hands. That's the level we want to reach. Don't be, however, afraid of being afraid. Don't feel badly if you're afraid of a thing. Just say, I'll do it anyway. And you'll find bit by bit that you will come to the point where you become victorious over that, and it no longer touches you. Another thought to remember is that the kinds of thoughts that we put out they send out a kind of magnetism that draws to us that which is expressive of that thought. Fear, in other words, attracts the very thing that we're afraid of. People who undergo disaster of various kinds, in some way have put out a call for that disaster. It's something that we're not usually conscious of, and yet It's there. It's in the aura. It's in the subconscious. It's your own karma, you see. When the actions that you've put out draw to yourself whatever comes to you. Why do they come to you? Because you've put that energy out that attracts it to you. Otherwise you would be able to go through a battlefield with bullets flying everywhere and not be hit. I don't suppose the bullet goes like this and then blip over your body and on again. It's just somehow that I don't know how it works, but this world is not the mechanical kind of world that it seems to be. And so you just won't be where those bullets are going, or people will, for some reason, not aim at you when you're there. In various ways, we are protected or injured according to our karma, not according to, well, mass karma too, of course, but not according to mere happenstance. So then if you have fear, it really behooves you to overcome the fear, if only from the standpoint that having that fear may attract to you the very thing you're afraid of. It's true. It's very important when you have a fear to bring yourself to that point of saying, all right, God, it's yours, it doesn't matter. And then put your mind in a positive trend. That will be your protection. The stronger the aura, the stronger the protection. The aura acts like an umbrella in the rain. The aura is a defensive kind of thing which prevents things from actually touching you unless they are that which is in harmony with the light, and therefore it's a blessing. But that which is not in harmony with that light can't get through if the aura is strong. Bad karma, of course, creates openings, weaknesses in the aura, but you can overcome that by strong positive thoughts. So that even if it's your karma to suffer, that's why in the Gita it says that even a little bit of the practice of this religion will free you from dire fears and colossal sufferings. The mechanics of that is that with this religion, meaning not you become a Hindu instead of a Christian, it means this religion of inward realization, this religion of inward actual experience of God contact rather than just theological belief and dogma, that a little bit of that meditation so strengthens the aura that then only light can come in unless the karma is very strong, and even then it will be greatly mitigated. Again, it comes from being centered in yourself, becoming a cause rather than an effect. The more you become centered here and radiate outward from that, Master said one way to not be affected by negative vibrations is to meditate and harmonize the vibrations in the heart, and then consciously to send out those harmonious vibrations in all directions from the heart, so that everything is a result of that radiation. That strengthens the aura. Another thing is, when doing the postures, for example, to move your hands in such a way that you feel consciously you're strengthening the aura. Live in the thought of being surrounded by an aura of light. Live in the thought of being surrounded by God's light. And in this way, in fact, you will find that that positive thought will help to overcome the thing that you're afraid of, your bad karma, whatever it might be, far more than just sitting there dreading it. Non-attachment, again, in this case, as in action without desire for the fruits of action, is the surest way to freedom from fear. Not to say, oh well, but if I don't think about it, then I'm not being responsible, and it might come. By non-attachment, by having your mind on positive things, it's much more likely to be to escape you, to pass you by. A very interesting thing that they've discovered in medicine, whenever they have a new drug, they always have a control group to whom they feed placebos, and another group to whom they feed the new drug to see how it works. And they have found that if the drug works in 10% more cases than in the number of people to whom they give the placebo, then it's good, it's acceptable. Because people to whom they give the placebos are affected up to 10% less on an average who don't take the drug at all, just the placebos, as those who take this new drug. I saw a television program in New York on my way over to Europe. I stayed the night in New York. And there was this doctor talking on the television. He was saying that every time there's been a doctor's strike, the mortality rate has gone down. There was one long strike in which the mortality rate went down 50%. And the morticians were getting worried. And so they studied their records, and they found that the last time the mortality rate had gone down so drastically was the last time that there had been a long doctor's strike. Again, people who depend too much upon somebody else to do it all for them, instead of just saying, well, I guess I've got to do it on my own, have less strength. It's much more important to, Master said, every time I get out of things, I find people running to doctors all the time. You have to be practical, but at the same time, the most important thing is that we just learn to have faith in God and be strong in ourselves. And people who do are likely to be the survivors. So, have courage, have faith, have love. Live in the thought that God is with you now. And learn also not to avoid duties, not to avoid conflict, not to avoid the stresses of life, but to handle them in such a way that you are always centered, not battered by them. Centered in yourself, acting selectively, saying, I'll do this now and I'll do the other when I can, and not try to fight all your battles at once. Always acting from this center, this concentration, and relaxed in yourself, as relaxed as you can be. You'll find that in that sense you'll be able to fight the battles of life the most effectively. The subject this morning